Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Dr. Christina Jung. I'm an assistant professor at Uzong University. I'm very excited to be here today. The topic of my presentation is the translanguaging practices of emergent Korean-English bilingual children in Korea. My interest in this topic stems from my personal experience watching expatriate friends and their bilingual children having a conversational exchange. I thought that it was really fascinating how these bilingual children utilize their linguistic repertoire to communicate and create meaning with the people around them. So the reason I decided to conduct research on this topic is that I feel it's a very important area of translanguaging research. Even though my study is based within a Korean context, I still believe that it provides valuable insight that can be extended to other countries in which translanguaging practices within multicultural and multilingual families is a growing and important aspect of society. This presentation is based on my research paper titled Bilingual Proficiency Development and Translanguaging Practices of Emergent Korean-English Bilingual Children in Korea. It was published in November 2022 in the Journal of Language Teaching and Research, Volume 13, Number 6. The contents of today's presentation are as follows. I will start off with the research context, in which I will explain about the background and context of the study. I will look at the concepts of monoglossic ideology of bilingualism versus translanguaging. Afterwards, I will explain how family language policy supports bilingualism and how identity development occurs through translanguaging. Then, I will move on to the rationale and purpose of the study. I will go into the details of my methodology and methods. The critical findings will then be presented and discussed. Lastly, implications for this study will be provided. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so let's start with the research context and background. According to the 2021 Population and Housing Census, the number of multicultural households was 385,000, rising by 4.7% from 2020. Multiculturalism has resulted in many shifts within family dynamics. Multilingualism is an important characteristic that uniquely identifies many multicultural families. So you can see that very recently, as the number of multicultural families has increased over the years, the number of multilingual families also has increased. Okay, so let's take a look at bilingualism in South Korea. In Korea, it has also recently become more common to encounter bilingual families, with one of the spouses being a native Korean speaker and the other a native English speaker. Although Korean-English bilingual families have varying approaches and practices regarding family language policy, what is expected in all multicultural and multilingual families is some form of translanguaging. Now I will provide a kind of short history of translanguaging. So originally it started off with this idea of monoglossic ideology of bilingualism. So in the past, a lot of researchers believe that a bilingual individual possesses two separate compartments for each language, which should not be intertwined or not mixed. For example, when an individual has the ability to use both English and Korean, it was believed and strongly encouraged that the two languages should not be mixed or used together while communicating. However, as time went by and as more and more researchers conducted research in this area of bilingualism, they realized that it was not that simple and that language is not really something that can be in discrete compartments. So translanguaging was the concept that researchers came up with, and it's something that conceptualizes language as an activity rather than a discrete entity. Okay, and this is evident in the morphology of the actual word translanguaging, where the grammatical verb ending of ing informs that it is an action. Okay, with regards to translanguaging, family language policy is very important. Family language policy, or FLP, can be defined as the particular language ideologies and beliefs about language practices in the home domain. The FLP and the decision made by each family is crucial in terms of influencing the language outcomes of children in a dual or multiple language home environment. FLP is a purposeful attempt to practice a particular language use pattern within the home translanguaging space and among family members. So in addition to family language policy having an important impact on bilingualism, identity development also is impacted through translanguaging. Among multilingual individuals, self-identity is greatly impacted through translanguaging. What is unique to multilingual individuals is that self-identity should not be considered as just one, but multiple identities in correspondence to their multilingual abilities. When students are provided a translanguaging space to fully utilize their linguistic repertoire, they are able to develop a positive bilingual identity about themselves. When parents support the use of translanguaging in the home, they nurture not only bilingual proficiency development in their children, but also help lead them to how they self-identify themselves culturally as individuals. Now let's take a look at the rationale for this research. So this research addresses the major gaps in translanguaging research among Korean English bilingual speakers and their families. It is anticipated that the results of this research will bring greater insight into the translanguaging practices of Korean English bilinguals in Korea and how they are utilized in their daily lives at home, school, and in the community, and its impacts on self-identity development. So the purpose of this study was to find the answers to these four questions. Specifically, what are the Anglophone fathers' perceptions of the bilingual proficiency development and translanguaging practices of the emergent Korean English bilingual children in Korea? What are the beliefs and values of foreign fathers regarding family language policy? What are the translanguaging practices of emergent Korean English bilingual children? And how does translanguaging affect Korean English bilingual children's self-identity? With regards to the methodology, I used a qualitative case study approach. This was because I needed to provide an in-depth, information-rich account of participants' lived-in experiences. The data for this study were collected through purposeful sampling. So the reason for purposeful sampling is because I wanted to focus specifically on families where one spouse was the Korean spouse and the other spouse was a foreign spouse, and they both had children, at least one child, who was able to speak Korean and English even if they are at the emerging level. And triangulation was achieved through semi-structured interviews, questionnaires, and researcher field notes. And the data were analyzed according to the three coding stages of open, axial, and selective, which are based on the grounded theory approach. This table shows the demographics of the participants. So we have the participant fathers on the left side here. There are 6 fathers, and then we have the pseudonyms of the children and their ages in the next column. And one of the fathers, participant father number 4, had 2 children. The rest all had 1 child. And the nationalities of the children are seen here. So they are Korean, Canadian, Korean New Zealander, or Korean American. And the parents' perceived fluency of Korean in their children range from low intermediate to high intermediate. And the parents' perceived English fluency level of their children ranged from pre-basic to intermediate. So you can see here that there is quite a range in terms of their fluency in English for the participants' children. So the critical findings were as follows. There are 3 main themes and 4 sub-themes. So the first theme was bilingual practices and beliefs of parents. The sub-themes included implicit family language policy and the importance of bilingual maintenance. The second theme was children's motivations for translanguaging. And the sub-themes for this included contextual foregrounding through linguistic repertoire and to navigate their multilingual reality. The third theme was the impact of translanguaging on self-identity development. So I will look at each of these a little more deeper using a quote that I found based on their interviews. So the first theme that I found was bilingual practices and beliefs of parents. It was interesting to note that there is no explicit or overt family language policy or plan in each of the participating multicultural families. None of the families specifically stated that they had a family language policy in place at home, and also all of the children are from families with an implicit form of family language planning, even though they did not label it as such. Here's one quote. We don't officially have a family language plan. Not specifically, I do bath time and there's a lot of English that goes on there. Our baths can take up to an hour, lots of games. When we're playing our Minecraft, we talk about what we're doing. He helps explain to me. He needs to explain it to me so I can do it. This is what we do. And the other participants also said something along the same lines. When asked if her family has a family language plan, one participant said we just go with the flow, and another said we do some code switching. So it really varied. Each family was different, but what was the same was that there's no real explicit plan. So the other sub-theme was the importance of bilingual maintenance. So it was interesting because even though the fathers said that their families did not really have an explicit family language policy or plan, it was still very important to them that their children grow up to be fully bilingual. For example, Amelia's father, who was a very strong proponent of maintaining both languages, he elaborated on his feelings and thoughts about his desire for Amelia to be bilingual, not just for academic success, but also to develop and maintain her connection to her Canadian identity. So he says, I think it's important for her to maintain both languages, not just academically, but I think it would be important for me at least that she gets to know my side of the family. It's hard because sometimes Amelia is a stranger to my own mom, you know. My mom doesn't really know a lot about her because she's 5,000 kilometers away and we don't really speak on the phone regularly. So in the future, if Amelia wants to live in Canada, it's important that she maintains both languages. So the second theme that was found was children's motivations for translanguaging, or the reasons why they use translanguaging. Among the emergent bilingual participants, translanguaging was used in unique ways such as a source of contextual foregrounding. Through translanguaging, participants utilized different aspects of their linguistic repertoires to communicate with family and friends on a level that allowed them to express themselves more fully with their developing linguistic ability. Different aspects of translanguaging were used by the children depending on the context at home, school, and public places. For instance, code switching allowed the participants to fill in gaps in their linguistic repertoire in both languages. For example, here is a quote from Amelia from when she was younger. According to her father, who said, last Christmas, my phone died. I said to my daughter, Amelia, let's go to the cell phone shop. I need to change my phone. She said, Dad, don't go by yourself. You're a foreigner. And she didn't know the word fraud, but she knew the word sagi. I'm like, what's sagi? Amelia said, just look it up. I don't know what it is in English, but it's sagi. You gotta go with grandma or uncle because there's going to be sagi. You're a foreigner. They're gonna take your money. So in contrast, Tim's family, they used words that were associated with a certain feeling. For example, the word emo. Emo refers to aunt in Korean, but in their family, they never use the word aunt. They always use the word emo. He said if he used aunt instead of emo, it didn't seem the same. So they always called her emo. So we can see that for both the parents and the children, translanguaging creates a specific kind of feeling which arouses certain emotions that are associated with a particular word. So another reason why the children used translanguaging was to navigate their multilingual reality. For instance, some would utilize their linguistic repertoires metacognitively to avoid specific people and situations in their everyday life. Mark used his English ability to pretend he couldn't speak Korean, so he didn't need to talk to Korean strangers when they were trying to make conversation in Korean. His father explains, I think he's aware that he's a little bit different from most kids. He's also aware of his bilingualism. When people talk to him in Korean, if he wants to talk to them in Korean, he will. But if he does not want to talk to them, he will switch to broken English. We're at a park and somebody runs up to him, or like a 할머니, and comes up to pat his head, and if he wants to speak to them, he'll talk to them and speak to them in Korean right away and address them. But if he's uncomfortable with them, he pretends he's a 외국인 or a foreigner and he cannot speak to them. So we can see that they kind of use this to navigate how they will react to people around them. So the third and final theme was the impact of translanguaging on self-identity development. It was found among the children of the participants that as they got older, they self-identified more with the majority culture and the language. So all of the participant fathers felt that their bilingual children self-identified as mostly Korean. The older the children, the more strongly they self-identified as Korean and spoke mainly Korean, which was the majority culture and language. So you can observe this trend when comparing the younger children with the older children. And as the children moved up in their education, the language of their schooling, which was the majority language, became their dominant language. It also appeared that for the children, the length and age of exposure in living in one culture and country had a strong impact on self-identity formation. So the longer the participants resided in Korea, the more they learned to self-identify with Korea. So in other words, the longer the participants lived in one country and lived in one culture, they learned to identify themselves with that country and culture. What was interesting was the fluid nature of self-identity formation. This could be observed in some of the more younger participants. So, for example, one participant's father stated, she spent 3 weeks now at home with daddy, so now she gets to speak English all day long. This has happened the previous 2 holidays when there's been COVID scares and the kindergarten shuts down. She gets 3 weeks with daddy, and at that time, actually, English almost becomes her instinctual language. But once she's back at school for a few weeks, Korean seems to become her instinctual language again. So now I will summarize the key points of my findings. The first is that translanguaging is the actual norm. So it was found that in the Korean English bilingual families in the study, translanguaging is generally the norm and is practiced in everyday life, which is in line with previous studies. The findings of this study were also congruent with earlier studies in that most families do not implement an explicit family language policy at home. Although the translanguaging practices of Korean English bilingual families in this study reveal that they usually don't have an explicit family language policy or plan, through some form of implicit family language policy, each family uses both English and Korean, making translanguaging a natural practice at home. The second key point was that the purposes of translanguaging by the Korean English bilingual children in this study were predominantly for communicative purposes, both inside and outside the home environment. Similar to previous studies, translanguaging practices allowed the bilingual children in this study to develop negotiation strategies during communication. The third key point is that there is an emotional nuance attached to certain vocabulary in a language. According to Wee, in bilingual first language acquisition, where cross-linguistic equivalents are learned, the child additionally learns to associate the target word with a specific context or addressee, giving rise to the possibility of code switching. The fourth key point is that translanguaging has an important effect on identity development. The effects of translanguaging on Korean English bilingual children indicate that a discrepancy forms between the proficiency of the two languages, with one language becoming more dominant over the other. This study further confirms that identity is not a fixed entity. Identity fluidity occurs during a lifetime. This was evident in the younger participants of this study. So let's take a look at the implications of this study. So what can we recommend for the government? So one thing that the government can do is to promote emergent bilingual children's bilingual development to create a more just and fair society. The current needs of bilingual children in Korea are not being met. The Ministry of Education should create laws to ensure that language and identity development needs are supported for bilingual household children in Korea. It is imperative to create a space that allows bilingual children to engage in translanguaging practices that are culturally rich and multimodal in order to further develop and sustain their bilingual fluency. And what can we as educators do? Well, it is important to encourage pride in bilingual individuals' home language and translanguaging practices. It is by supporting and encouraging these translanguaging strategies that positive developments will occur with regards to bilingual children's flourishing fluency and self-identity. The numerous affordances and benefits with regards to encouraging the use of translanguaging in bilingual Korean-English families makes the challenges of maintaining translanguaging practices worthy of the time and effort. So in conclusion, translanguaging practices in emergent Korean-English bilingual families in Korea are pivotal in the development and maintenance of bilingual ability, communicative interactions, and self-identity. The results of this study further elucidate and support the salience of technology within bilingual children as an essential aspect of their bilingual fluency. When bilingual families are able to fully utilize their linguistic and cultural repertoires through the process of translanguaging, they will engage in more meaningful dialogues. The active use of translanguaging is the greatest scaffold leading to the edification of bilingual children's bilingual fluency and self-identity. In order to establish bilingual sustainability, three important factors need to be considered: an immersive translanguaging home environment, schools' understanding and incorporation of translanguaging pedagogy for the classroom, and government support of bilingual and multilingual families. Addressing the needs of bilingual children in Korea is becoming ever more important as the multicultural school-age population is steadily on the rise. And here is a list of references that were cited in this presentation. Well, that wraps things up. Thanks so much for your attention and for your participation. I hope you learned something interesting from this study, and I do welcome any questions and comments. So please feel free to contact me by email. My email address is jungcdh@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Enjoy the rest of this conference and have a great day.